Mandalorians are cool. The Jedi and the Sith are more powerful, and the lightsaber is the best single object in sci-fi history. But as a group of people, nobody's cooler than the Mandalorians. The first one you ever see is standing in a row of baddies with Imperial officers afraid in their presence. Then Darth Vader, the embodiment of fear, the underling joking, child D-handing, cyborg witch king of space, tells him you're too violent. Tone it down a little. You don't even hear his name. You just see a guy apparently made of ice in a jetpack, unfazed by a 7-foot magic psychopath. Funny that a character this memorable started as a scrapped design for a new Stormtrooper outfit. Fittingly, that's close to how it started with me too. I walked into a new job, and there against the wall was a Vacuformer machine. If you've never seen these, it's basically an air hockey table combined with an oven. The heating elements warm a sheet of plastic until it is soft, you drop it down over an object, and the Vacuformer draws the air through the holes in the platform to suck the plastic close to the object. Just like that, you have a thin, lightweight copy. My first thought when I saw this thing was, this is the method a lot of people use to make Stormtrooper armor. I started wondering how hard it would be to make the forms needed to shape the plastic around for all the armor pieces. But if I'm going to go through all that trouble, why not make it more worthwhile? Do I want to be the guy that missed every shot and hit his head on the door? Or the only guy clever enough to track down the Millennium Falcon and then got oopsied into a toothy sand anus? But that's not important. Then something else happened. We took a job restoring some steel outdoor lights, and my job got a pneumatic planishing hammer. This is basically an air-powered hammer operated with a pedal. My mind started racing. I'd never really worked metal before, but there was this amazing machine. And then I heard the fateful words from my boss. You know, there's a lot of steel left over. If you wanted to make something to learn how to use the hammer, go right ahead. That was it. Like a face hugger implanting an embryo, the idea of steel Mandalorian armor was born. It would eventually burst forth to metaphorically ruin dinner in the best possible way. First came the design phase. The initial plan was simple. Make the chest parts, attach them to a vest, and from there just use store-bought pieces to complete it. Black Series helmets, either toy van braces or maybe 3D printed ones off of Etsy, and simple coveralls from a work supply store. That did not happen. Okay, easy start. Drop some patterns on poster board, trace them onto sheets of metal, and cut them out using metal shears. Now comes the hard part. How do you strike metal with a hammer in a way that shapes it instead of just making an ugly dent and a loud noise? I tried hammering it over a dome, and it sort of worked. However, it compresses the edge and ended up with a wrinkled outer ring like a pie. But it gave me a chance to try out the planishing hammer. It left little dimples in the steel, and I found out that the pressure has to be correct on this thing, so I rigged up a pressure valve and gauge from bits around the shop. After that, it smoothed out the metal surprisingly well. I figured that if the sheet metal doesn't like being shaped around a convex form, maybe hammering it into a concave one would work. And it did! I just used a sanding attachment on an angle grinder to dig a big dent into a hunk of wood and then hammer the steel into that dent. Next, I had to use an anvil to hammer a lip into the edge of the metal, give the armor pieces a bit more rigidity, and just because it looks cool. This is what I shaped the edge of pretty much all the armor pieces with. I think it's called a vice anvil. If it isn't, then it really should be, because, come on, that's exactly what it is. This was all painfully loud and pretty hard on your hands. And the next bit wasn't going to be any more fun. I have the metal parts, but they need to be smoother, shinier. Enter the rotary sander and hours of loud, rattling discomfort behind a respirator and noise-canceling headphones. It started with 120 grit sandpaper, then 220, and 320, and 500, all the way up to, and I kid you not, 10,000 grit paper. I didn't even know they made 10,000 grit sandpaper. Nobody knows that. In the end, it was worth it. Because once you get to about 3,000 grit sandpaper, kind of a magical thing happens. You go from something that does reflect a little bit of light and is kind of shiny, to something that actually has a mirror surface and you can start seeing reflections in it. And that is just cool. After I started getting the hang of working the metal, I wondered, how hard is it to actually make the van braces and the helmet? Maybe some other extra armor bits here and there too? Turns out, not as bad as I expected. I started on the helmet by cutting out 2 football shapes, hammering them into half domes, lining them up next to each other, and they don't even come close to fitting. After accepting that I had made 2 very odd-shaped salad bowls, I cut out new shapes, hammered them, and riveted a strip down the middle to join them. The face panels took a little bit more time, but I decided to cut the right shape dent into some wood and hammered the cheeks. I swear, there's a 13-year-old in my brain that subconsciously makes right sentences like that. I have no excuse for the rest of my brain that decides to leave it in, but, whatever. Next, I added some padding and stitched together a skull cap. I also had to add adhesive felt to the rest of the inside to deaden the sound. When I spoke for the first time while wearing it, the sound bounced off the bare steel and it felt like somebody dropped a bucket over my head and filled it with lit firecrackers. Now, I said the metalworking part of this wasn't too bad, but the van braces took some designing. They should look different than the usual ones that you see. Sleeker, but still have some visible gadgetry. This is both a stylistic choice and because I tried hammering detailed shapes into the steel and it was a massive pain that mostly looked terrible. I dismantled a gas torch and rebuilt it with a bunch of old shower parts to make the flamethrower. You might notice some areas with perforated metal. This was some more scrap at the studio that provided a nice bit of contrast to the solid areas. Next, I took a drawer slide and a bunch of random bits from who knows what that I had left over from building the blasters, more on that later, and made a taser. The last part on the back of the right van brace was something that I added 3 years later. I ran a cable through the main chunky bit connected to my finger and built a spring-loaded mechanism to raise a missile launcher by tilting my hand down, inspired by Starscream in Transformers Prime. Good show, check it out. Thigh and upper arm armor is the perforated steel with a thin strip of leather over the edges. Then it is riveted in place and from there attaches to the flight suit with snaps and straps. A quick explanation about rivets. You can get these things in different sizes. All you have to do is drill a hole and hammer them in place. They are very easy to use and give something a good mechanical bond. Okay, now I need to attach the rest of the metal bits to something. After looking for a long time, I just could not find anything to attach the torso armor to that looked anywhere close to good. And if I couldn't find it, I'd have to make it. And to do that, I would actually need a complete design for the armor. When I was just keeping an eye out for anything that would work, the whole design would just kind of make itself. All I had to do was tweak little bits here and there to make it cohesive. However, if I'm making more and more from scratch, then I need to decide on a specific direction. Something timeless, something iconic, something that resonates through cinema, and not like nipples on a batsuit kind of way. Boba Fett himself seems to draw a lot of inspiration from one source in particular, the man with no name. A nameless, gunslinging bounty hunter, spurs jangling as he walks. Listen during Empire Strikes Back. He is never actually named, and he jangles. If it's good enough to build Boba Fett, and by extension the entire Mandalorian race, then who am I to turn away from it? However, while I want to mainly draw from Eastwood's character from the Dollars trilogy, I do want to draw from some of the other nameless heroes out there. The nameless hero is a full archetype at this point, including characters like the lead in Yojimbo or Roddy Piper in They Live. The nameless hero is all about mystery. Are they good? What is their motivation? They are usually very capable, which asks even more questions. While giving more information on a regular character fills out their story and usually improves them, giving too much on a properly done nameless hero can destroy them. It takes away the mystery. I think that's why I never liked the Wolverine origin stories. Anyway, I've got a direction now. Eastwood is wearing a tan leather vest, and since I need to get the armor on something, that means I start looking for material. Eventually, I stumbled across a tan suede sport coat for $10 at a thrift store. This is where sewing comes into play. I've never been good at sewing, and people making properly fitted clothes seems like sorcery to me. Plus, this is sewing leather, and I don't have a sewing machine. I start by removing the sleeves, I lower the collar, I sew up the front, and I open up the sides. Finally, I'll add some straps to the side so it can be fastened up, and this thing now goes on like a poncho rather than slips on like a jacket. I finish by lining it with quilted fabric. All this is done by taking pliers and jamming the needle through the leather. Working with steel was easy compared to this. At the time I thought, at least the sewing is done. Anyway, time to attach it to the metal. I decided to use high-strength Velcro with an adhesive backing. That way the piece can be removed if I need to adjust the placement, modify them, or if I just change the design. If possible, always make things easy to take apart. Even if it seems like extra work at the time, it is usually well worth it and will save you a lot of time further down the road. On to the next task. To make the various belts, straps, and holsters, I was going to have to work with leather, including wet molding. This wasn't as intimidating as metalworking or sewing. Unlike both of those tasks, I actually had tried working with leather this way once before. To wet mold leather, you just soak the leather in water until it's saturated, lay it over the object you want it to shape to, and just clamp the edges around it and let it dry. After that, use a leather punch to make the holes and sew up the sides. This leather is way too thick to try just sewing directly. The belts you can make by cutting the straps, placing the buckle, and riveting everything in place. I added some accent pieces just for fun. Next, I looked up ways to make simple pouches, because if you've played any Zelda game, you've become very fond of having multiple pouches. I included one shaped like a phone and cards, because I do not want to carry a wallet at a con. I'm already hauling 75 pounds of sci-fi related heat stroke. I thought, okay, done with the leather, now to find boots that work with this. I looked online, in thrift stores, I considered modifying a pair more and more heavily, I hunted through garage sales every weekend. Nothing. Any boot that would look even slightly usable after numerous mods still wouldn't fit me. Kind of a side note, this is not a new problem for me. I've got really wide feet. give you kind of an overall image, at this point in my life, I'm basically just degenerated into just an orc with hobbit feet. Yeah. Anyway, if I can't find any boots that will work, I'm gonna have to figure out how to make those too. And that is a task that took an entire year all by itself. By now, I am comfortable with working with leather, but making a pair of boots demands patience, precision, and endurance. After weeks of watching YouTube tutorials, I come to the conclusion that I can't choose a simple route. These are going to be big boots that need to withstand a full day of walking and look like they match the amount of work that went into the armor and the holster. I need to wet mold the leather after stitching the uppers. I need to use the right adhesive, of course, horribly toxic contact cement, and I need to sew the sole, insole, and uppers together in a process called welting. None of this was fast or easy, and to start, I needed to make lasts. Lasts are basically replicas of feet to build a shoe around. They can be wood or resin and come in all different sizes, except mine. It became clear that I would have to make these. But how does one make exact copies of their feet? I couldn't afford to make a mold of them, so that left carving them out of wood as the best option. I cut pieces of inch-thick wood and placed them on either side of my foot. Then took curved bits of poster board and set them on top of the wood. After pushing those against my feet, I taped the poster board pieces together. Now, I have a shape of my foot at 1 inch high. Add another layer of wood, put the pieces around my foot again, and keep repeating that process. So now, I basically have little slices of the shape of my feet at 1 inch intervals. Now just take those shapes, trace them onto the wood, cut those, glue all those wood pieces together in order, and sand the corners down, and you get a replica of a foot. I then sealed them with acrylic paint. They were going to be nailed to wet leather after all. And cut them in half so I could take them apart bit by bit once the shoes were done around them. Now comes the long task of soaking the uppers, pulling them onto the lasts with a pair of pliers, nailing them, attaching the soles, and so very, very much stitching. Adding buckles was an easy part, and done. Sort of. Not really. Actually, I ended up altering them a few times over the next couple of years. They were too short, so I used Bondo to lengthen the toe of the lasts, poured boiling water into the toes of the boots, and jammed the lasts in there to reshape the toe. Somehow, this actually worked. I also added some steel armor, a bit that makes the jangle sound like the spurs, added cool little accent bits on the front. Finally, there are 2 accent armor pieces up near the top that are not metal, but actually vacuformed pieces. And that required me to go on a little bit of a side quest. The fact that I can't afford things, combined with my childhood love of the A-Team, gave me the ability to piece together Franken tools that sometimes actually work. This is true of all humans, really. I mean, necessity plus broke equals ingenuity. After a long move, we slept on an air mattress for a couple of months. After patching it multiple times, it finally died with a sad wheeze, but the air pump in it was still functional. Long have I been saving the still-beating heart of our mattress after I cut it from its vinyl corpse. For what purpose? I couldn't say at the time, but fate had looked forth and burned its true purpose into the walls of eternity, making plasticky bits for nerd boots. All I had to do was get a funnel from the dollar store, cut out a circle of plywood, drill some holes, and hot glued it together. Then I cut a frame out of plywood to hold the sheet of styrene that fits over the Vacuformer. Since it is so small, I can just use a heat gun to soften the plastic. On to something a bit flashier. Look, I'm new to the world of Foley arts. This is the best blaster sound effect I could make with what I had available in the garage. If you were going to make a Mandalorian, you need to make a really cool blaster. A New Hope rented some handguns and just put a bunch of random parts on them so they could later be returned in their original condition. It gave those blasters a realistic look and a convincing weight that you could see in the hands of the actors. Mine were built in a similar way, but with BB guns. Plus, I had no need to preserve the condition of the original item. I gutted these things. They are certainly not and will never again be functional. Which is just fine with me. They're going to conventions. I need them to be as just inert as possible. The blaster in my belt holster is basically just the frame of the handle, along with the trigger and the hammer. Even those are disabled. The cylinder is a pipe with copper wire wrapped around it, and the barrel is a shower valve with a dimmer switch cover bolted over it. I cut away most of the handle to replicate the look of Eastwood revolver and added a little bit of gold paint. I made wood handle scales, the sculpted crate dragon inlay. To make the inlay, I sculpted them out of clay, made a silicone mold, and cast it in lead-free solder. Let's say you wanted to make a mold of something. It's a pretty simple process. You take the object you want to make the mold of, find a little base to put it on, a piece of wood, scrap of plastic, old box. Lay the piece on there, seal it down with some glue or maybe some clay if you have it. Try to make sure that you get that outer edge sealed up so the silicone doesn't go underneath it. Build up a wall around the outside using whatever you have around, poster board, bits of plastic. Cut a soda bottle or a can in half and make the walls out of that. Attach that around your piece, again using clay or glue. I recommend hot glue because it'll fill in the gaps. Then, once you've got that all sealed up, mix up some of the mold rubber, pour it on there, and let it sit for a few hours. Cure time will vary depending on the rubber that you use. Good silicone can take pretty high temperatures, I think around 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Solder melts below silicone's tolerance threshold. You just have to make sure you clean the silicone mold first, otherwise it'll mess up the surface of your casting. Don't use mold release either. The heat will cause it to boil instantly and really screw it up. The carbine is a bit different. I replaced the handle with the handle I found at a junk shop. I have no idea what this thing came from, but they look amazing. There's like 4 buttons on the thing. I would love to know what this thing is from. If anybody knows, leave a comment. The barrel is actually an old air filter from some kind of vacuum in a lamp socket from a junk shop that I went to. I carved the wood pieces out of a 2x4 and made the rest of the stock from a piece of flat steel. I found a bunch of discarded CO2 cartridges and used a pipe cutter to chop them up to add some always welcome shiny things. The scopes on both blasters are just real scopes. They're dirt cheap online. The Vibra blade is a fun combination of materials and techniques. The blade is L200 foam that was shaped, sanded, and engraved with a soldering iron. Then it was coated in Mod Podge and painted. I used my favorite process for achieving a metallic look: lay down a layer of gloss black, then spray on Traxxas chrome paint. Not a sponsor, I just really like the stuff. I only wish the price hadn't gone up to about $30 a can. Then I used an airbrush to add the color variation that metal gets in extreme heat. The handle is layers of particle board cut to fit around the blade and glued together, and then sanded. I made the finger grip out of a chunk of old pine and cut the rubber grip from a mat. That old flashlight provided the switch. The LEDs that light the blade came from a robotic head that made long ago, though not far away. Sorry. a little soldering after making a plastic form to hold the battery, and now it is a lit fiber blade. Finally, I added a ring to the back and some leather accents. I also used the leather cord to make a bola. You know the thing in cartoons that looks like a rope with a ball at either end? Usually Batman throws it around the ankles of an escaping bad guy. That's a bola. Don't make one. If you do, don't use it. It's one of the only items in the world that has an automatic event attached to it. If you try to use it, you will hit yourself in the face. Either end of the bola are a Hissis fang and a rancor tooth. Both of them are made by roughing out a hole in some clay that is close to the shape of each tooth, then mixing some clear resin with plaster dust and dye. After it is set, I just sanded it to the right shape, painted some accent colors on them, and added a brush-on acrylic clear coat. I tied the cord to the teeth, but also nailed the cord in place. I didn't have to hide it since it seemed like something the character might have to do in real life. Well, as real as it gets in the imaginary life of a monster-fighting galactic bounty hunter. The last things I wanted to make were some shells for the carbine. I took some extra brass tubing, cut them into a load of small pieces, and narrowed one end on a grinder. Then some metal snaps held on with epoxy sculpt made the backings. It occurred to me that Mandalorians never seem to really have good relations with Force users, and the man with no name characters never seem to love authority. To that point, it made sense to make this guy have shells tipped with kyber crystals. I know it's a ridiculous idea, but it's fun. It's mysterious that he would have them, they're overpowered, and it would seriously annoy the Jedi, so it seems to fit the character. All it took was a simple sculpture, a mold, and a lot of time casting dyed resin. If you use any kind of resin, any of the stuff that sets clear takes 2 to 3 days to really cure, so expect that. At last, the weaponry is complete. Oh, also, if the carbine looks familiar, it's because I totally based it on G1 Megatron. If you recognize that, it means you are aware of the important things in life, and that, like me, you're watching yourself degrade more and more quickly into a pile of nostalgia and regret. But who can think of that when there are monster skulls to make? I'm not really sure what a sound gag would be for sculpting and mold making. Mandalorians are fond of trophies. At least Boba Fett is. While the explanation varies as to who or what the braids on his shoulder came from, the point is, he blasted something, and he wanted a reminder of the joy and malice of that day. Kind of like Hector Salamanca's bell. I didn't want something that cruel, so I went with parts of things that probably tried to kill him. Most of them are creatures of Endor, because I love the Ewok adventure movies and the Ewok cartoon. Look, I was 4 when I was introduced to Ewoks, and they were awesome. Tree houses, magic powers, and hang gliders. Besides, the giant Gorax and his pet Boarwolf were the baddest things ever. So I wanted a piece of Boarwolf pelt. I looked at Fun Fur, and no. It may work wonderfully on other projects, but it just looked terrible as a small chunk in its own. Although, I did kind of like some of the color change in the fur. So I took a piece of gray leather, brushed on a layer of contact cement, then cut some of the fur off the Fun Fur piece, and pressed the ends into the cement. After a wash of brown paint, it actually looks like an old piece of hide. Of course there is a Gorax braid next to it. The last representative of Endor is the skull of a Divto, a crested 3-headed snake. This was actually my first attempt at working with L200 foam. I know it is popular in the cosplay community, and I can see why. It is easy to cut with a razor, yet dense enough that it can be sanded. After cutting out the basic shape, I used a Dremel to refine the details. This is where the profanity started. While it can be shaped with a Dremel, it also likes to catch the tool and cause parts of itself to instantly vanish in a puff of foam dust. Now it was covered in a kind of fuzz that would not entirely sand away, so I decided to use the safest and most predictable tool of all, fire. Surprisingly, it worked pretty well. The heat smoothed out the fuzzy surface and it looked like I would be applying a top coat soon. Then I got careless. I left the flame on the foam for an instant too long and the nose just vanished. I was only tapping the flame to the foam for a small fraction of a second, but that was enough. I made 3 replacement noses. 3. Just to get one that looked right. But I have to say it was worth it. I attached it with a dab of contact cement and coated the whole thing with about 8 layers of Mod Podge. I'd never used Mod Podge before this. It was nice to use a coating that wasn't toxic. I airbrushed it an even white and added some yellows and browns, and it was on to the teeth. Snakes have some wicked teeth, most of them pointing backwards to keep the prey from escaping their jaws. Fangs point forward when extended to strike, so I went with that position. Did you know that some snakes have multiple rows of teeth that can move independently of each other to walk an animal towards its doom? Seriously, multi-row action teeth, hinged hypodermic fangs, unhinging jaws. Snake mouths truly are evolutionary nightmares. Anyway, I mixed some plaster and dye into some clear resin to give it the right translucency and poured it into simple fang shapes that I pressed into clay. After that, they were just sanded into shape and glued in. Now, I was on to the Kurosani Troll braid. This braid has a piece of flesh attached to it. So I first had to press a lumpy kind of dent into some clay. Next I cut a piece of textured leather out about the same size. And I laid that piece of leather over some silicone that I poured into the dent. Luckily, the silicone was exactly the color I needed, so no need to add dye or pigment. After I painted the leather with some acrylics, I punched hair through the leather and into the silicone. If you've never punched hair, it is so tedious that it actually is kind of therapeutic. Your brain just accepts the drudgery because there is conceivably no good way to speed it up. Finally, I added some red dye to silicone glue and brushed the back to make it look like a fresh addition to the trophies. Kinda gross, but fun. One trophy isn't critter related. The crest of the ancient Sith. Taken after a run-in with a strange cloaked figure with a red sword of light. Nice necklace though. After sculpting half of the symbol, I made a mold, cast it in resin twice, glued the 2 pieces back to back, and painted it. I looked for a gem that would fit properly, but once again, searching gives way to, oh, screw it, I'll make it myself. Clay, resin, done. Finally, I spent about an hour with some 16-gauge steel wire and a pair of pliers, and a couple of episodes of Creatures Features on YouTube, and I made a length of chain to hang the crest from. The monster bits all hang from a magnet on the skull, while the Sith symbol hangs from the belt. The last accent piece to make is the crest on the armor on the right shoulder. The design is a mashup of the symbol for the Mandalorian Neo Crusaders and the moon on the robes of the character Neo Jimbo. It is sculpted in clay, molded, then cast and painted. And the whole magnet thing for holding the skull on, yeah, that did not fly. Had the armor on, looked down, and 2 minutes later the skull was attached to, like, my ribs, so... Okay, we're going with a mechanical bond for that. So I just used a pop rivet, made a steel spacer, and put a little wire fork shape on the back of the skull, and it just snaps into place. At this point, I thought the armor was done. So I tried it all on, and it looks good.
Well, most of it looks good.
The flight suit looks odd. It did its job, letting me test everything. I wore the armor on Halloween, then decided to try it out at a convention to see if I could tolerate wearing this whole thing for that amount of time. I was happy with it. And then a couple of things happened. I saw some pictures from the con, and I started looking at costume contests at conventions. In the photos, I could see that the suit fits vertically, but not horizontally. It was designed by a company that makes work attire, so it's made to fit as many people as possible. Consequently, there is a lot of bagginess and bunching from an elastic waistband. If I wear it by itself, I look like Bane after he runs out of venom. Also, if I ever decide to try to enter into a contest for the first time, there is a minimum percentage as to how much a costume has to be made by the contestant. If something is store-bought, the judges can't even judge that part of it. Incidentally, if this video somehow does well, I might make a follow-up video of me trying to enter this thing into a contest, and officially learning that my trash endeavor has brought shame onto the very concept of costumes as a whole. At least I will have closure. To address the flight suit issue, I put it on, clamped the excess and the baggy areas, and marked a line with chalk where the seam should go. Next, I studied the construction of the suit, made poster board patterns for each part of the suit based on the new seam markings. I also made some modifications to the pattern to heighten the collar and eliminate pockets and the waistband. Now I needed a lot of tough breathable fabric in a very dark blue. When I watched The Good and the Bad and the Ugly as a kid, I remember sitting there struck by the thought, someday I'm gonna color match that man's pants. With fabric acquired, I could trace the patterns onto it, making sure to line up the pattern in the proper direction in relation to the threads. I think it's duck canvas? Maybe not. It's blue. After cutting the patterns out, it was time to pin them together and figure out the right order to sew the seams. I managed to find an old sewing machine for $20, and even though I've never used one of these before, what could go wrong? Did you know that on a belt-driven sewing machine, the belt can slip and you have to open it and reset the timing? And did you know that if the tension is set wrong, you end up with what looks like a bird's nest of string on the back of your seams? Did you know that the bobbin housing is a being of pure hate that would bestow thread only so it can take the thread back, entangle, and devour it? I can still hear its laughter. Zipper installed, snaps installed, and suits fits? I won't pretend this isn't at least 20% luck and 40% divine pity after watching me break 8 needles. Last, I just had to seal all the seams with the zigzag stitch. Now, almost the entire suit was made, and not store-bought. Almost. Except the gloves. But that's okay, it's just one tiny part, one little part that I can see that haunts me. Crap. No, gloves don't get the happy music. Looking at the gloves that I had originally bought for the armor, I could see the pieces and I could see the stitching order. Looking at the gloves, I'm also realizing that I had never noticed just how many parts there are and how much of a pain it would be to properly pattern this. I traced out a pattern from the gloves and drew it out on a bit of scrap fabric. After sewing it, it's as fun as you would imagine trying to sew between the fingers of a glove. I tried it on and it did not fit. The palm was too narrow, the fingers were too short, everything was off. I knew that making it out of leather would help it stretch more, but this was way off. So I tried the tape method. Take a rubber glove, put it on, cover it in tape, mark at the seams with a marker, and carefully cut along those lines. I increased the proportions of the original pattern where needed and compared it with the tape pattern. They were very close, so I make another fabric glove. It doesn't fit. So I alter the pattern where needed and screw it, just trace it onto the leather. A note about making leather clothing like this: leather has a stretch direction. Pull it in one direction and it won't budge. Pull it at 90 degrees from that and it will happily stretch. Make sure you line up your pattern so it stretches in the direction that you want. I wanted it to stretch width-wise on these. I'm not sure if that's correct for gloves, but it seemed to be what was most useful to me. One glove patterned out, sewn, and it doesn't fit. Well, the pinky finger and the thumb fit. I sat down trying to resign myself to making yet another pattern or plotting to build an army of robot commandos to burn every factory that can successfully make gloves. Then it hits me. This is old and worn armor. I chose to make it this way because it fit the armor better. I love the way that aged things really appear, and also because I knew I was doing almost everything for the first time and I needed to choose a theme that would cover up my mistakes. When you think about it, the gloves should be more torn up than any other part. I make a new pattern, but just for the middle two fingers. I paint the leather so it looks like it was from a different source than the rest of the glove, cut the old two fingers away, and use contact cement to adhere the new fingers and add rivets for extra durability and, once again, because it looks cool. And it fits. Some bits of copper on the knuckles and one glove done. I could then take the updated pattern from what I had learned from the first glove, and the other hand doesn't fit either. Well, it fits less bad than the first one. So I slit the index finger to widen it, wrap it in a strip of canvas. The middle finger fit okay, but it bunched up at the base, so I hid it under a strip of leather to make it look like the damage had occurred after the other finger repair. More copper and gloves. The entire costume is now handmade. Everything else should hopefully be easy, except that the poncho is the most recognizable part of the character that I'm drawing from, and if the weathering isn't right on the armor, it won't look old, it'll just look crappy. The hardest part of this was finding fabric that looked right. I wanted something rustic with a heavy weave, but not as rough as burlap. I finally found it, and then got started designing a Mandalorian version of Eastwood's iconic poncho in the Dollars trilogy. I included echoes of a Mandalorian helmet shape on the front and a mythosaur skull on the back. I taped out the design using only straight lines to make it look like it was woven in, and then put it over a glass table with light under it so I could tape the exact same places on the other side. Then it was just a matter of airbrushing layers with acrylic paints over the whole thing. After that, I needed to weather the whole outfit. Looking at worn clothes I have, and some reference photos, I airbrushed various worn patches of dirt, oil stains, and blaster burns. Sandpaper could be used to rough up the knees, the elbows, and boots. Well, I had to use a foam rasp to fray the edges of the poncho. A foam rasp is something you can find at any hardware store. Oh, if you're working with clay, really useful there too. Pick one up. Since I always wanted this frayed look, I didn't add a seam to the poncho. I wanted it to look old and worn and fray even more over time. There are also places where there's fake blood stains, where I cut through parts of the suit and then sewed it back up roughly to look like the person wearing it had taken damage and repaired his armor on his own. There are probably some real bloodstains in there too, but that's all part of the creative experience. With the look of the armor done, it was time to implement some ideas concerning wearability. Mandalorian armor is famously tech-heavy. While I couldn't turn it into a flying envirosuit, I was able to add a few fun mods into the helmet. First, I wanted a fan. Wrapping metal around materials that hold air in between each layer is not only the way to build this armor, but also the same method used to build ovens. Not unexpected that adding a vent in the back of the helmet with a small fan inside was necessary. I took a little 1.5-inch computer fan with a USB connector and added it to a rechargeable battery. Then I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have a real camera in the viewfinder? No more taking out my phone to take photos at a convention, especially since I would be wearing gloves if I was in the armor. An internet search showed me that there are plenty of micro cameras that I could use, as long as the components weren't all attached to the circuit board. If they were just connected by wires, I could then separate them and put the lens and screen in the helmet's viewfinder and mount the controls someplace else. I purchased a little cheap camera, opened it up, and yes, they were wired. But it was using a ribbon cable that I couldn't find anywhere. But wait, if I could just remove the control button and move that. Nope, that's attached to the circuit board. And I don't have the experience or tools for dealing with that. Then it finally occurred to me, what if I just soldered wires to the contact points on the board and added another button without removing the original? Would that work? Electronics has always been a weakness of mine. I've managed to build a bit of skill in certain areas, but only at a very basic level. If I ever try to improvise with electronics like I do with some other materials, the result is almost always lost hours and a bricked piece of technology. But somehow this worked. To other people, this may seem like a toddler raising a marker over his head and roaring in triumph because he managed to take the cap off. But to me, this was nailing the exhaust port of the Death Star. It took some cutting to make room for the lens, but the camera fit amazingly well into the viewfinder, and it didn't take long to make the mounting brackets for all of it. The final part was mercifully simple. There are plenty of Bluetooth headphone and mic systems for motorcycle helmets. I just chose one with a radio built in because if I ever enter a contest, then I'm going to be waiting in a room for a long time. Okay, one more quick modification. The plug on the fan can accept a second USB device, so I cut it off the fan, wired a multi-speed switch with a standard USB plug, added the multi-port one to the battery, built a mount for the battery to attach to the helmet, and now I can have a fan attached while also charging either the camera or Bluetooth system at the same time. It occurred to me to make the taser and the flamethrower functional as well, but I decided against that. The 13-year-old in me is still sad about that. However, altogether, I am indescribably happy with this thing. Finally, it's fit. I decided to change the paint a bit. Finally, it's finished. Three years. It took 3 full years to make this. I learned how to hammer steel, build blasters, make boots, make clothing patterns, use a sewing machine, and a few other things my mind just didn't bother recalling out of exhaustion. This was easily the most educational project I've ever built. Not the biggest, or really even the hardest, but it taught me more than any other. If you love making things, the most fun you can have is learning new processes, even if it doesn't feel like it at first. Most of the time when you think, I don't get this, it just means you haven't gotten it yet. The hard part is continuing, like with the freaking gloves. Being ridiculously stubborn helps, but if you want to learn a new skill, best thing you can do is figure out how to connect it with something you care about. If I ever enter this into a convention contest, I know the judges will see the flaws. Chances are I won't place, but I want to hear what critiques they have. I want to know the tips they can give me to improve my armor and to learn how other contestants made their costumes. It's a big step for me to try that, but this whole project has been about making blind leaps. I want to come away with this learning as much as I can, and hopefully you learn something from this video. To that end, remember, if you really push yourself, you too can accomplish something like this. 3 years dedicated to making an over-designed can wrapped around an obsessive jackass. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Either way, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you make stuff on your own and post videos about that so I can watch them and maybe learn something new. Thanks.